You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Locked On Hawks Postcast, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me is NBA and college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code Locked On NBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first purchase. And of course, our Locked On Hawks Postcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, DeShaun, the Hawks were down once again, like this conversation we had a couple nights ago, but they battled back to take a lead before ultimately going down. We'll talk about that. And now that the fat lady has sung what is next for this Atlanta Hawks team, we'll talk about that as well. But first, we got to talk about a valiant effort that fell short in the Hawks' 123-114 loss to the Miami Heat earlier tonight. In fact, just a few moments ago. And DeShaun, for you, you said that your take was this team was in Roadrunner mode. And I put air quotes around that, Roadrunner mode the entire game.
No, they were Tenitra. And listen, I don't remember who sung the "It's So Hard to Say Goodbye."
Boys to Men.
Boys to Men.
Not originally, but the most
for sure.
one.
Yeah, of course. No, that one. Yeah, that one is hitting home a little bit right now. That's for sure. Thought we might have had a couple more shots at this for these episodes for the remainder of the season. Nonetheless, I definitely feel like they were in Roadrunner mode, just being sped up all night long. I really believe when you see that Miami got up to open up the game 10-0. I said, okay, it's about to be a long night because the Atlanta Hawks are going to do what they've been doing and what I felt like they couldn't really afford to do coming into this game was to kind of be playing from behind. Then we typically see them make their run towards the end of the game. It's the same old story every single time. And you knew, even though it took a little while, you knew that they were going to eventually make that run, but it wasn't going to be comfortable. And they looked very uncomfortable the whole night, even in the instance where they tied the game up, even in the instance where they took the lead. They just looked to have been sped up, almost like somebody was pushing them in the back all night long kind of thing. And so, and that's a little strange because Atlanta is actually the team that is one of the better teams in terms of pace. That's just not moving up and down the floor fast. That is actually end up providing the balance that you need in order to win basketball games. And Miami's more of a half-court offense. They don't really get up in transition. So they kind of, in a roundabout way, beat Atlanta at their own game by forcing Atlanta to kind of speed up their game and getting really uncomfortable with it. And I think that was the tale of it because Atlanta just really couldn't find any kind of comfortability in there at all.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. And interestingly enough, we talk about beating you at your own game in different ways, by the way. So we've talked before about the Miami Heat kind of beating the Hawks, well, in different ways. So not just beating them at their own game, but beating them in different ways. One of the ways that we talked about was whether or not they would beat them at the Trae game, which they did not. Actually, the Hawks did a great job with figuring out how to give Trae opportunities to get his shot. So Miami didn't beat the Hawks in the way that maybe we were concerned they might, the way that we thought they might, but they found different ways to beat them, or they found different ways to keep it close, if you will. And like you said, when I look at fast break points, not a lot of fast break points from Miami, but just enough to kind of keep the Hawks honest. Bench play has always been a marquee for the Hawks. Miami, that's the way they were able to stay in this game and ultimately win it as well. They kept pace. And then the other piece was where we knew it was coming. And that's what I want to talk about. Because ultimately speaking, as great as it is to be down 17 and battle your way all the way back, or almost all the way back, the last 5 showed who the Hawks really are. Just period. When we look at the fact that we saw the Hawks battle back, and of course, there's a little bit of good fortune in regard to what the Hawks were able to do, because hey, Andrew Wiggins had a pretty good look didn't go down. So
Mhm.
that sends this game to overtime. But then the Hawks get outscored in overtime 17-8.
Yeah.
And not only did they get outscored in overtime 17-8, but DeShaun, if you look down into the numbers, you look down into the stats, what really stands out is how the Heat were able to do it. Might I? Can I keep the floor?
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Go for
Because
it.
this is exactly what I told you I was concerned about. So we go into the game, and yeah, I'm going slow with this because I want you all to process this. I've been saying this all season, and so
Yes.
but in case you guys weren't listening, or in case I need to say it again for the people in the back, we go into overtime, and it's 106-106, right? And yes, let's see. Andrew Wiggins misses a layup. Okay, that's fine. Onyeka Okongwu, great. You get a rebound. Trae Young, out of bounds, bad pass, turnover. I'm making a point because that then does what? Sends the ball to the other side. And what does Tyler Hero do but make a 25-foot three-pointer?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, regardless of the fact that Trae Young then made a floater, didn't matter. Yep. Because that was the only spark. Because after that Trae Young floater, of course, it's Tyler Hero with the three-pointer first, Trae Young with the floater next, but then it's Davion Mitchell with a three. And then for free, Trae Young travels and Davion Mitchell hits what? Come on, DeShaun, give it to me. Another what?
Another three.
Yeah, yep, there you go. And then Terrence Mann, offensive foul, turnover, Andrew Wiggins with the driving floater to at least recover from what he did at the end of regulation and to begin overtime. Onyeka, great three. We're going to talk about Double O's magnificent performance in a little bit. But ultimately, I go back to, yes, Trae gets the step back three and brings it back within three. But guess what the Miami Heat do? They get the ball back to Tyler Hero, and he gets yet another stinking three. And then Davion Mitchell gets another stinking three. And then that's your stinking game.
Yep.
This is what we knew was going to happen regardless. And I give the Hawks a world of credit for battling back. I take nothing away from coming from down. You basically had a 23-point turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
I applaud you for that.
No doubt.
But ultimately speaking, the thing that has deaded you this entire season, it got you.
It did.
And as much as we talk about fatigue, because it does take a lot to battle back from being down 17, it doesn't matter. Three-pointers had nothing to do with fatigue, in my opinion, in that fifth period. That was just their nemesis, their kryptonite showing up at the worst possible time, meaning the other team's going to go set on the perimeter, and you have no perimeter D, and they're going to end it just like that.
I think, Tenitra, that, as we got towards the tail end of the game, it had a little bit of a March Madness feel to it. It was like, all right, nobody wants to go home kind of thing. And that's where it kind of got interesting. But at that beginning, I think that, Atlanta was definitely, it felt like they weren't playing with enough urgency. It felt like they thought the game was going to start an hour later than when it actually did. Like, that's just the vibe.
Like they thought it was a 7:30 tip and not a 7?
I always talk about vibe, energies, and feels. That was the vibe, the energy, and the feel that they gave. And I feel like in some cases, what they wanted to do was predictable to Miami. Miami knew that they were a team that could get ahead early on the Hawks. They did. They knew that they were a team that Atlanta was going to be able to make a comeback, make a run against. They did. That's inevitable. But they also knew that they were a team that could put the exclamation mark or exclamation point or slam the door on Atlanta. Atlanta was not going to be able to get the stops. I mean, all night long, forget about just the runs Atlanta made. We knew that was going to happen on the offensive side of the ball. They did not get any stops. Sure, there were some instances where there was a 9-0 run, low run here, low run there. But when it came down to who really needed, not about wanting, because you can want all day long. I used to hear of that old saying, you know, want in one hand and need in the other, however it goes. You can want all day long, but and I just feel like in some instances they waited too long to decide that they weren't gonna go home. And then they got to a point where they was like, all right, we're not ready to go home. We're refusing to go home, where that should have happened a long time ago, but I still give them the credit because they came to play at that point in time of the game. But Miami was prepared to answer the call every single time that there was a situation where Atlanta was going to make a run. And, you know, what is it? To the victor goes the spoils, or however that saying goes. I mean, Miami, to be honest with you, Miami played this game like they wanted to be playing in the playoffs. And that's why you see Miami advancing and not Atlanta.
Yeah, and for way more of the 53 minutes than the Hawks did. Yes, you had moments in time throughout this game where the Hawks definitely looked the part, but for the majority of the 53 minutes, the Miami Heat looked the part, and that's why they're going to have the opportunity to take on the Cleveland Cavaliers. But nonetheless, the Hawks did have that moment where they battled their way back so that we're actually having a conversation about an overtime, and we'll talk about that turning point next. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether your need is for extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. And finding the right talent, well, if you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible expert results. Fast and easy hiring, where posting a job is free and simple. And within a day, with multiple candidates who are qualified, that's what you'll have to choose from, and cost-effective growth. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
So the Hawks are down by as many as 17 points tonight. And man, especially in the beginning, DeShaun, it felt like it was way more than 17 points when the Miami Heat basically came out and were up 10-0, 10-2, 12-2. But then the Hawks slowly but surely in that third quarter started to show some serious signs of life. And even in the second quarter, because they at least had that lead down to single digits. And then ultimately third quarter battle back, fourth quarter take a lead, which was your turning point. So we do want to give credit to the Hawks for their ability to say, hey, we can double down and we can start making some things happen. You started to see some really good things in that third quarter, but really in the fourth quarter, where the Hawks went on that 25-9 run after the Heat had gone on a 12-4 run of their own to kind of end the fourth quarter. And you really saw everybody step up in that fourth quarter to help the Hawks to push this thing to overtime.
I was going to say that a little bit of everybody. And I think it was really a page that Atlanta ended up taking out of Miami's book, because they weren't just relying on necessarily one guy. Everybody was giving their contribution. Everybody was giving production. And I think that's what kind of hurt the Atlanta Hawks a little bit at the beginning. I feel like in some instances, Trae Young was kind of shooting the team out of the game some ways. He realizes his shot just wasn't falling, whether it was from outside, whether it was from getting to the paint, the typical teardrop that he, drops on the opposition just wasn't falling. A lot of shots were coming up short. Obviously, he wasn't the only one. It was a lot of other guys too. And that was part of that whole being sped up part of the game that I really feel like Miami made them uncomfortable. But they really needed that assistance from somebody, because shocker, Miami defending Trae Young well. We already talked about that blueprint for the last, I don't know how many, not episodes, no, not episodes, years. We've been having this conversation.
Yes.
But no, I mean, George's Niang was, obviously hitting some big shots, and you also, had moments. Onyeka Okongwu, we can't say enough about. I'm trying to save him until later on in the show. But obviously he was a big part of a lot of that too, and Karis LeVert. We always talk about, and this is one thing I was even thinking about during the duration of the game, especially when the Hawks went down early before we even got to this point where we're talking about the runs that was made 25-9 or what have you, is Karis LeVert having to be that big energy guy, that replacement for DeAndre Hunter that we thought we were going to be able to see in the first round and all that kind of stuff. I really thought that he needed to be the guy because he is the instant offense. He is the guy that comes off the bench and gives the big spark on that side of the ball and everything else. And he contributed some during that stretch as well. So I want to definitely give him some credit. But it was just a combination of everyone not being able to hit a shot. But in that stretch, they were able to put something together. And ultimately, that's what made the game as interesting as we saw it.
Yeah, because if you look back to the third quarter, like you said, Georges Niang with 5 points, Onyeka Okongwu with 9. We'll keep 00 for later. And Karis LeVert, Mo Gay, both with 3 points, and Dyson Daniels and Trae Young, both with a couple buckets respectively. But really, it was that fourth quarter where you saw Trae come alive. But going back to your point, coming alive, letting the game come to him. Because, he goes 1 of 6 to contribute to the Hawks 1 of 12 shooting from 3 in that first quarter. And it's like, okay, you didn't shoot enough 3-pointers in the game a couple nights ago against the Orlando Magic. Now you're seemingly overcompensating for that. But I think as the game went on, he kind of realized, like, this is what Miami's going to do. This is who they are. So let me try to find my spots. Let me pick my spots as opposed to forcing my spots. So in that fourth quarter, you see Trae go 4 of 6, 2 of 3 from the 3-point line. You see him get a rebound, a couple of assists, if you will, and even a block, and no turnovers, more importantly. So I think that's where you really saw Trae say, okay, this is where the game is coming to me. Let me find
it. Him organically. That's right.
Yeah. And same thing for Dyson Daniels. He gets 7 points on 3 of 5 shooting from the field. He makes a 3 boards, 2 assists, no turnovers. So you really saw them kind of tighten things up beyond just Onyeka Okongwu and even Terrence Mann going 2 of 2, 1 of 1 from the 3-point line. In fact, a board and an assist. So, and DeShaun, one of your favorite numbers, an absolute donut hole for turnovers.
Goose egg, quarter. Bagel.
Goose egg. That's how you
bullet wound.
Yeah, that's how you get back in a game. That is how you get back in a game. So you got to give the Hawks a world of credit for the way in which they battled back in that fourth quarter, because that's really how they were able to do it, getting those 9 defensive rebounds, so limiting the second chance point opportunities for the Miami Heat. 10 assists, being able to move that ball from side to side and make sure that ball movement and that fast pace that you talked about, a pace that where Miami wasn't rushing them to be, they were moving quick as the game allowed them to. And then, of course, having a couple steals will never hurt to have the other team turn the ball over. So, I think that that's really where you saw this game kind of turn on a dime, if you will. But now we'll talk about the biggest reason that this game turned on a dime. And that's because, like we said a couple nights ago, and it didn't work in the Hawks' favor, size actually does matter. But it went in the Hawks' favor this time, at least for the moment.
This is the Locked On Player of the Game.
DeShaun, at the 5 was where the Hawks really and truly thrived with size, because Onyeka Okongwu is right in there battling this entire game. He finishes with a double-double, 28 points, 12 rebounds off on 12 of 19 shooting. But we love to see 4 of 8 from 3, because that is the modern day bigs kind of stat line. 8 of those 12 rebounds, 8 defensively. So he was so critical in helping to minimize those second chance opportunities for Miami. And also 3 steals on the night and no turnovers to go with the block. So Onyeka Okongwu just absolutely continuing to have what I like to call his 2024-25 coming out party.
The 3 steals was probably the biggest part of all of that, which is a good thing, because we've kind of gotten used to and accustomed to seeing him put up, similar numbers. It's not a shocker anymore when we see him do
Yeah.
this. So we've seen some consistency, and consistency has always been the word that I didn't feel like I could use very much unless it came with another word in front of it being inconsistent. But it's not even just about this game. When you look at the bright spots of this team this year, and I know we'll talk about it more in the next segment, but you look at the bright spots. It was the player of the game. That might be the brightest spot that we have seen. A lot of people aren't going to talk about it because it looks boring to some people. It looks very basic. It looks very, very fundamentally sound. I think one time we were having conversations about the nicknames that they give him, the Big Calm or whatever it is. And that's just what it is. But again, it reminded me so much. I know you've heard me say this a million times, but just in case some of the viewers are new to this, we stay true to this. Is the comparison to Al Horford during his time here and how we watched him kind of develop and progress as a player in an Atlanta Hawks uniform. So I think that was probably one of the biggest things for this team. And it's not a surprise, especially considering the way that Miami plays defense on the guards. And don't get it twisted. I mean, Bam Adebayo is no pushover on the defensive end by any stretch of the imagination for Onyeka. And by the way, some instances where he did have to go to the bench. The backup guy at that point is Muhammad Gay, for crying out loud. And you don't really have the Clint Capella to rely upon anymore to kind of help out in any of those instances. And you don't really have a Larry Nance even for the bonuses that he does give you on either side of the basketball. You don't have that either. It has really kind of feel like it has for a long time solely been based on Onyeka Okongwu. To see him doing that from the very beginning of the time that he got into the starting lineup inserted all the way into the very last game of the season. I don't care what team you root for, and I don't care what team that he's playing against. You have to tip your cap to what you've seen him do in a Hawks uniform this season.
No question, no question. He by far is the guy who, if there was a most improved player on a team, or the guy who literally has taken the most leaps and bounds from the year before, it's Onyeka Okongwu. And to me, it's not even close. Absolutely amazing what we've seen do, not just in this game, but I think really setting the stage and making the case for himself that he truly is, unless the Hawks go out and miraculously get themselves a superstar veteran type of center. I think he's made the case.
I'll wait.
Yeah, exactly right. So in other words, he's made the case for himself to be the center for next season. But speaking of next season, unfortunately, 2024-25 is a wrap for these Atlanta Hawks. So what's next? That's what we'll be talking about on the other side. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save money. All-in-one convenience is also pretty darn cool, because instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever with monarchmoney.com.
This is what you'll be talking about.
So, DeShaun, this Hawks season ends with, of course, 40 and 42 in the regular season, and unfortunately dropping the 2 play-in games, and we are done. It is a wrap until we have our conversation about draft time and free agency and the like. So we know that the NBA draft is slated for June 25th. So we've got roughly 2 months to pontificate on where this thing goes. And we know free agency always kicks off for the NBA July 1st. The Hawks haven't really been very active in free agency. So for us, it kind of makes sense anyway to start with the draft. But let's do this as well before we even start with the draft. And here's where we get to bring in our besties who've been hanging with us this entire year, including Robert Blackman, who says it was a good run. Now what's next? That's the $1 million question. Can't agree with him more, because that is the question. Like, where do you go from here? And one of our viewers, Antara Moody, she goes, damn, like Florida Evans, like what to do. And then it's like Jalen Johnson. That kind of brings up some commentary from her, because obviously that's the cog. That was the cog in the wheel that when he was done for the season, you kind of knew it was going to fall apart. Now, the Hawks made a valiant effort, DeShaun. They really, really did. But without a Jalen Johnson, without a Larry Nance Jr., there were just a lot. There were too many pieces and too many things to overcome. But that said, as this roster is currently constructed, as you started talking about it and people saying, okay, I want to ask you this question. So we talked about earlier size matters, right, Sean?
Of course we did.
And I heard someone saying in one breath the size matters, but in the other breath saying that they couldn't wait to see what the Hawks would do next year and run it back. Okay, which is it? Because if you're saying run it back, but you're saying size matters and that you don't have the size, where are you running it back to get the size from? And who are you getting rid of in order to replace said person with said size?
Well, they're not running this back. At least I hope not. If they decide to try and run something like this back, then in 365 days from now, we're going to be having the same conversation that we're having right now.
Right.
If you're commenting, and we're so grateful, thank you so much for chiming in and hitting us up on the comment section. Feel free to hit us up on Twitter, all the good stuff, all the viewers and those of you who are watching. But I think that you got into this situation by trying to run it back after the Eastern Conference Finals when you ran that back. And if it's just not progressing and just improving and getting better, there's no way that you do that. Now, obviously, when you start talking about the needs, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're leaving Onyeka Okongwu, who is our player of the game, who is our player of the season, probably, to go along with probably Dyson Daniels, I guess. And leaving him out there on an island for an entire season as a starter all by himself. So you certainly want to address the backup center role. And we've just kind of been talking about those same two positions, the backup center and the backup point guard role.
True.
Backup point guard they have in Bufkin. But regardless, forget about just being hurt. I'm just not sure that he's shown enough to say that he can be a, consistent backup point guard and be able to play that role efficiently enough
go down
to where I feel confident. Exactly. So just that alone within itself, I think are the two areas that I don't think that this team can really afford to skip out on. And for those who are talking about, and I'm glad that you mentioned this about looking ahead to draft, because for those of which who are always sitting there waiting on pins and needles, looking at their imaginary watches, trying to figure out what moves that the Atlanta Hawks are going to make during the free agency, don't hold your breath. We want you to still stick around with us until next season so that you can watch some Hawks basketball. Because if you get caught holding your breath, you may not be with us very long. I don't see them making moves. They never make moves. Nobody ever thinks about coming to play here. We never hear rumors of anybody coming to play here. If we do, I don't believe those people. I instantly unfollow them. We have seen this same story and watched this movie way too many times for way too long. And the draft is honestly where you got to keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah. One thing that Robert mentioned, Robert Blackman, who has been with us from day one, every single game. Shout out to him.
Yes.
Appreciate you for bringing your folks too, because I see some people who are now who've been here with us for a minute as well. And one of the things he said, which we didn't mention, but I'm glad he reminded us, was that random role player. It's like, remember several years ago before Bogdan Bogdanović was really inserted into the starting lineup, he kind of was that random role player. He was the guy who would literally come off the bench and destroy the other team. And the other team was looking around going, what just happened in like 17 minutes?
That's right.
Oh, you might get 17, 20 minutes and might get like 20 points. And the Hawks don't really have that person. I kind of wish for starters that they would get her themselves a version of a random role player who could absolutely do it. Can Terrence Mann do it in some instances? Yes. Can Karis LeVert do it in a lot more instances? Absolutely. And who knows? We never quite saw what Larry Nance was able to do because he was down before he was really down for the count before you could really count him in.
True.
I really would love to see if the Hawks could somehow get that guy. Maybe it's a journeyman, and I'm not saying Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is coming back to the state of Georgia, but he just came to my mind in terms of that hired gun that can be in your starting lineup, but doesn't need to be, but who can come in and give you some seriously productive minutes. So that's kind of one place, because I'm looking down the chart and everybody is kind of like a to be determined. So when I look at like a Dom Barlow, kind of still to be determined about exactly what that's going to look like. Mo Gay, still to be determined, and what exactly that's going to look like. But I think that when Landry Fields said that this team wasn't necessarily about resulting, that to me kind of said that's because meaning not instantaneous results. Like, we're not going to go out and snip the aprons and just go on a spending spree and luxury tax be damned. We're going to build through the draft, and we're just going to take our younger talent and continue the development of those players, which they've done a good job of. I think that's probably where we're going to see the growth in this team. We just have to hope that there are some multiples who come in and they're like breakouts. But I think you can expect Jalen Johnson to come back with a fierceness. I think that Zachary Risache was, for me, a pleasant surprise as far as how of the uptick we saw in the second half. So
No doubt. No doubt.
Player the second half of the season, that is. And I do believe that Onyeka is probably ensconced. When you're a center shooting 4 of 8, you probably are going to stay in that fifth spot. We need maybe a stronger, like you said, a backup to him. But the Hawks have some opportunities. I mean, they're in a situation where, of course, they don't necessarily own their own draft pick this season. It belongs to the Spurs, but then they're looking at everything else. They do own the Kings pick, right? So you got to look at that. If they fall out of the top 12, then they own the Lakers unprotected first round pick. The Kings, of course, lost to the Mavs Wednesday. Mavs face the Grizzlies tonight. The Grizzlies are up big, have been really in command of that game the entire way. So if the Grizzlies happen to stay there, that actually bodes well for the Hawks, because and it looks like they're doing good. They're up 23 going into halftime. So Hawks fans, you better become Grizz fans real fast, because if you can, then that means that bodes well for the Hawks potentially, because a lot of the scenarios, DeShaun, were still around both the Hawks and the Grizzlies winning. But there is that one scenario where, let's see, if the Heat and the Grizzlies win, then that would put Atlanta like 13-14 via Sacramento Kings. So there's still some possibilities there where you're rooting for teams to go in a certain, not team, as in the Memphis Grizzlies, to go in a certain direction, so that the Hawks at least have a little bit more of a control of their destiny in the draft, since that's probably where they're going to build. But anywho, I'm going to let you, DeShaun, give our last rites before we put this 24-25 season to rest.
Man, it was it was a fun ride for this season. So I'm gonna go out with giving this team a solid C for the season. The whole in-season tournament thing and that run and winning that many games, and obviously overachieving at the end of the day based on what I thought this roster would be after DeJounte and whatever else, DeAndre and everything else. I'll give them a solid C. I'm good with that. It's been a great season. I can't wait to do it again with you next year.
Same here. I have enjoyed myself with you, even on the days when you and I wanted to just take somebody to the mat, because it was just like that. I was used to do it to it sometimes. But ultimately, I got to give him a C as well, DeShaun, because when you lose a guy in Jalen Johnson who was making his case for all-star recognition, that makes a world of difference. And you got to give the Hawks a lot of heart for being able to still battle through, and at one point even being in the hunt for a 6th seed. Give them a lot of credit for battling to keep themselves in position. But that said, you got good pieces. Now you got to go get more, because DeShaun, Tate, and Tenitra Batiste do not want to come back
at all
next season talking about some darn playing. We's
again.
Tired boss. Thanks everybody for joining us. As always, we appreciate you, because hey, Locked On Sports Atlanta is the #1 place to hang out after every game. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We'll see you next season.